They didn't call it vandalism. They didn't call it dangerous. They called it an eyesore. The HOA said my fire suppression system ruined the view. So Karen ordered it destroyed. Pipes ripped out. Water tank drained. Sprinklers smashed into the dirt. I warned them. I told them this ridge had burned before. I told them fire doesn't care about rules or aesthetics. They fined me anyway. 2 weeks later, the wind changed. Dry heat rolled in. Gusts howled through dead grass. Karen threw a backyard party. A brand new grill. Dead brush 6 feet away. Laughter. Music. Wine glasses clinking. Then one spark lifted into the air. One ember. And the hillside ignited like gasoline. Karen screamed as flames raced toward her house. She begged for water, begged for help, but the system she destroyed was gone. Fire engines were minutes away. Her home had seconds. And the only thing standing between her house and the flames was the man she tried to silence. I still remember the way Karen stood there, arms crossed in her red blazer, as if she were staring down a misbehaving child. Except I wasn't a child. I was a grown man, 61 years old, with a lifetime of fire scars and calluses that could tell stories louder than her whole board. And I wasn't misbehaving. I was protecting what mattered. This thing she said, gesturing at the water tank I'd installed near the ridge, it's an eyesore. It ruins the line of the hill. I looked past her to the valley. Dry grass shimmered gold in the sun. We hadn't had proper rain in 7 weeks. The wind smelled like sage and dust. That hill, the one she called ruined, had nearly gone up in flames 12 years ago. Back then, nobody from the HOA came to help. It was me and 2 neighbors with shovels trying to keep the flames from crawling down to our homes. It's not for the view, I told her calmly. It's for the fire. Karen huffed like I'd told her the sky was purple. There hasn't been a fire here in years, not yet. That part she didn't like. I'd installed the suppression system. A 2,000-gallon tank, 2 ground pumps, and a set of low-profile sprinklers that ringed my upper property line. Just after a storm dry lightninged a field north of us. It was all up to code. I had permits the fire marshal had signed off, and the neighbor behind me, old Mr. Jensen, even helped dig the trench. But Karen and her newly elected HOA board had other ideas. It's not in the aesthetic guidelines, she said, reciting her line like scripture. It doesn't reflect the community image. I stepped down from the slope, my boots crunching gravel, and stopped a few feet from her. I didn't build this for the community image. I built it because that ridge is a death trap when the wind shifts. This system could save all our homes, including yours. She gave a tight smile. You're exaggerating. I didn't answer. People like Karen don't hear words, they only hear compliance or defiance, and I'd just chosen the latter. She left that day with a warning letter already printed, the HOA logo stamped at the top like it meant something. I wasn't surprised. Since Karen took over the board 6 months ago, she'd turned every inch of our neighborhood into her personal chessboard. Mailbox colors, garden gnomes, even the kind of gravel we could use for walkways. Nothing escaped her attention. She called it preserving uniformity. I called it obsession. What scared me wasn't just her rules. It was how fast she got others to follow. Brad Whitmore, the treasurer, nodded at everything she said. Linda from Lot 32 acted like Karen hung the moon. Even when they didn't agree, they stayed quiet. They wanted peace. But peace in the face of stupidity isn't peace. It's surrender. The next board meeting was packed. I sat in the second row, dusty from hauling firewood. Karen stood at the podium like she was mayor of a city instead of president of a volunteer board. Lot 17, she said, reading from her notes, has installed an unapproved water structure on common view land. This sets a precedent for visual disruption. Objection? I said, standing. Her eyes flicked up like she hadn't expected pushback. You'll have your time, Mr. Merrick. That time is now. The tank is on my land. I have county approval. This is about safety, not visual disruption. Someone in the back coughed awkwardly. A few heads nodded, but no one spoke. Karen pressed on. The structure must be removed within 30 days. Fines will accrue for non-compliance. When the meeting ended, I stayed behind. A few neighbors offered soft support. Sorry, Russell, but you know how she is. Maybe if you paint it brown, she's just trying to follow the rules, but I wasn't trying to break them. I was trying to survive them. That night, I stood on my porch with a cup of black coffee, looking out at the ridge. The tank gleamed faintly in the moonlight, squat and silent, like a watchman on duty. I thought about my uncle, the one who didn't make it out when the wildfires jumped the road in '91. He'd tried to fight it with a garden hose. I swore I'd never be that unprepared. I didn't sleep much. The next day, I called the county office and confirmed, again, that the installation was legal. I even got the fire marshal to send a signed letter of support. I mailed copies to the HOA board certified. Still, the fines started arriving $100 a week, then $250. By week 4, they'd totaled over $1,000. I refused to pay, and then came the final notice. Karen showed up at my door, flanked by Brad and a contractor in a safety vest. She handed me a letter. By vote of the board, she said this non-compliant structure will be dismantled on the 10th of next month. You've been notified. She smiled again like she'd just handed me a party invitation. I didn't smile back. Before she left, I asked her one last time, if this neighborhood catches fire and someone dies because you took this away, will you still say I was ruining the view? Karen blinked. For a moment, I saw something pass through her eyes. Doubt, maybe, or guilt. But it vanished fast. We follow the rules here, Mr. Merrick. She turned and walked off. I looked out again at the hills, dry and brittle, the kind of dryness that cracks underfoot and whispers warnings on the wind. The kind of dryness that doesn't care about rules. Just fuel. Just fire. And it was coming. They didn't even knock when they came. It was early, around 7:30 a.m., when I saw the contractor's truck idling near the base of the hill. A second vehicle pulled up behind it. A white SUV with the HOA logo sticker slapped crooked on the window. Karen stepped out, clipboard in hand. Sunglasses too big for her face, already acting like she owned the land. Brad got out of the passenger side and started checking something on his phone. Neither of them looked up at me, even as I stood on my front porch watching. I didn't move. I wanted them to see me there, to remember that this wasn't some vacant lot. This was my home. They waited at the edge of my driveway like they were measuring the wind. Eventually, the contractor approached. Mr. Merrick, he called up. I'm here, I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were already curling into fists behind my back. I'm with North County Maintenance. I've been hired by the Willow Hills HOA to begin removal of a non-compliant structure on Lot 17. Just want to confirm that you're aware. I stepped down from the porch, walking slow. You're talking about the fire suppression tank, yes, sir? I hope you brought a permit for trespassing. That gave him pause. He looked back toward Karen, who didn't move. She stood near the SUV, scribbling on her clipboard like this was all routine. A landscaping adjustment, not a violation of safety or sanity. Brad finally looked up from his phone. Russell, let's not make this harder than it has to be. I'm not making anything hard, I said. You are. That tank is legally permitted by the county and inspected by Fire District 12. You've got zero jurisdiction here. Karen stepped forward now, lips pinched tight. We do have jurisdiction, Mr. Merrick. The HOA governs external modifications visible from common areas. Your tank violates Section 4.3 of the Community Aesthetic Code. The Aesthetic Code, I said. This isn't a bird bath or a lawn flamingo. This is a fire safety system. She didn't flinch. It's still subject to approval. And when I submitted it, what happened? Silence. You denied it after it was already built and inspected, because it disrupted the visual flow of the hillside. You think I care about visual flow when this whole valley's a tinderbox? Brad sighed like he was exhausted from all my logic. Karen said quietly, the removal is happening today. If you attempt to interfere, we'll have to escalate. Escalate? I laughed once. To what, the HOA fire department? The contractor stood awkwardly between us, waiting. I walked up to him, held out a folded piece of paper. This is a certified copy of the installation permit. You remove that tank, and you're liable for any loss of life or property caused by your actions. That's a personal lawsuit, not just the HOA. His eyes widened. Sir, I'm just the installer. Exactly. So go back to your truck and think very carefully about who's paying you and whether they'll show up in court to defend you. The man hesitated, then turned back to Karen. They argued quietly while Brad pretended to scroll. Eventually, the contractor shook his head and got back into his truck. Karen marched over furious. "You're obstructing enforcement," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm reminding you that your authority ends where mine begins." She tried to keep her voice even, but her hands were trembling. "We'll file a formal order through HOA Legal. This isn't over." I nodded once. "No, it's not." They left. But the letters started coming every 3 days like clockwork. Official HOA stationery, each one more aggressive than the last. One of them included a printout of a grainy photo someone had taken of my tank from a walking path half a mile away. Unapproved industrial object visible from community path number 6. It made it sound like I'd built an oil rig. Then came the escalation, $500. Fine pending lien, if not resolved within 45 days. Threat of property access, revocation, HOA attorney, involvement community, legal arbitration. I kept every letter. I made a binder, actually, labeled it The War on Common Sense. A neighbor down the street, Lyle, a retired sheriff's deputy, laughed when I showed it to him. "She's going to pick the wrong hill to die on one of these days," he said. Problem is, I told him it might be my hill. The neighborhood started whispering. Some folks thought I was being stubborn. Others said I was protecting them. But no one really stood up, not in public. People were scared of Karen, not in the "she'll hurt me" way. But the HOA could fine you, isolate you, make your life hell, one form at a time. That was scarier to most folks than fire. Then came the meeting. The HOA monthly board meeting was always held in the clubhouse. Normally, 10 or 12 people showed up. This time it was standing room only. Karen opened with the usual pleasantries, then jumped straight to the unresolved violation on Lot 17. Her tone was sharp but rehearsed. This violation has exceeded all remedy periods. The board has voted 50 to authorize removal under emergency aesthetics enforcement. Emergency aesthetics. The words didn't even belong in the same sentence. I stood up. "My name is Russell Merrick. I'm a homeowner, a father, and a man who's fought wildfires with a shovel and a water hose. That tank you want to tear down, it's not some ugly decoration. It's the only reason this ridge hasn't gone up in flames during the last 2 heat waves. And it's legally installed." Karen tried to cut me off, but I held the room. "You say it's about views. You think tourists are coming here to admire empty hills. This isn't Napa Valley. This is a fire zone. And all it takes is one spark, one bad grill day, one thunderstorm, and when it happens, not if, but when, you'll wish that tank was still standing." There was silence, then a few claps, just a few. Karen adjourned the meeting fast, flustered, but I knew it was temporary. The next week, a new letter arrived. This one had a bold red stamp across the top, "Final notice, removal scheduled." The HOA had hired a second contractor. This time, they weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to rip it out. The smell is the first thing that comes back. Not smoke, not at first, but the oily tang of burning plastic. After that, the memory unfolds on its own. I was 17 when the canyon caught fire. We lived in a double-wide tucked into a slope just outside Calaveras. My Uncle Pete was a welder, built trailers in Modesto, and drove home dusty every evening. He had a laugh like a truck engine, and hands like tree bark. He kept a fire axe by the door, a habit he never explained until it was too late. That summer was dry like paper. One day, in early August, a transformer blew near the ridge, and the sparks leapt down into the tall grass. By the time the smoke hit our side of the hill, the flames were already halfway to us. I remember the panic in my mom's voice, the way the sky looked, copper and orange and wrong. I remember running out barefoot, dragging a hose that didn't even reach halfway. The neighbors were gone. Nobody knocked. Uncle Pete didn't run. He was trying to keep the fire off the propane tanks with a rake and a shovel when the heat got him. By the time the fire engines arrived, there was nothing left of the trailer or of Pete, just melted metal and scorched footprints. The next morning, I stood in what was left of our yard, and I found his axe buried in the earth, its handle charred but intact. I never forgot that. Not through college, not through 3 decades, working with timber crews and fire mitigation contractors, Not when I moved to Willow Hills with Sarah after she got sick. And definitely not when I bought the land at the edge of the development. The only lot with that scrubby ridge that nobody else wanted. They said it was too dry, too rugged. I said it was home. I built the house with extra clearance from the brush line. I cleared 50 feet around every structure. I installed metal gutters, ember screens, and fireproof vents. I paid for the water tank and suppression system out of my own pocket. 2 years of savings gone in one summer, and I didn't regret a penny. Sarah thought I was overdoing it. She wasn't wrong. But I needed control over something. After what the cancer did to her, after watching her fade one cell at a time, while I couldn't do a damn thing. The idea of losing something else just because I didn't prepare made my skin crawl. That fire system was more than pipes and pumps. It was a line between me and the helplessness I'd lived through twice already. I'd filed every permit, got the county to sign off. The installation crew had experience working wildfire zones. The setup was as low profile as possible. Earth-colored tank camouflaged hose, access sprinkler heads, hidden beneath rock covers. But none of that mattered to Karen. When the second contractor arrived, the one Karen hired after the first one backed off, I wasn't home. I was at the county records office pulling documents to prove my legal standing. By the time I got back, the pump housing had already been dismantled. One of the workers was wrestling a hose spool onto a trailer. The tank was drained. A deep groove was carved into the dirt where the equipment had been dragged. They didn't touch the water line, probably because they weren't sure if it was city property. But everything else, gone. I stood on the hill and stared at the exposed earth where my defense had been. The wind blew up from the south. It smelled dry, sterile. I called Karen. She didn't answer. I left a message. Calm, controlled. Karen, this is Russell Merrick. Your contractor dismantled my suppression system without cause. You've now removed county-approved, legally permitted equipment from private property. If anything happens, if any fire damages my land or anyone else's because of this, it's on you. You've made that choice. Click. I filed a report with the sheriff's office. They told me it was a civil matter unless I could prove criminal intent. I contacted an attorney, a former fire code specialist named Angela Blunt. She reviewed my documents, nodded slowly, and said, "You've got a case, but the court system is slow, and fire isn't." She was right. The ridge was still there, still dry, still primed to go up like newspaper in a steel drum. The only difference now was I couldn't stop it anymore. That night, I stood on the back deck with a flashlight scanning the hills like I used to when Sarah was sick and the coyotes came too close. I still had the axe, Pete's axe, mounted near the door. I took it down and placed it by my boots, just in case. The air was too warm for spring. That worried me more than I liked to admit. The next morning, a letter arrived. This one wasn't on HOA letterhead. It was handwritten, folded neatly slipped under the mat like a secret. Russell, I'm sorry. I didn't agree with the vote, but I was outvoted. I know you were trying to protect us. Please be careful. Lyle, I folded the note and placed it in the binder next to the violation letters. Then I opened the window and stared at the ridge and waited. I didn't know what was happening until I heard the sound of steel scraping against gravel. It was a deep groaning sound, heavy equipment on the move. I was in the garage, organizing some old fire gear I hadn't touched in years when I felt the vibration more than I heard it. Something primal shifted in my gut. I stepped outside and saw them coming up the gravel road, a flatbed truck with a crane arm, a skid steer on a trailer, and 2 more pickups behind. They weren't playing around this time. At the front of the caravan, stepping out with clipboard in hand like some conquering general, was Karen. Red blazer, sunglasses, clipboard, again. This time she didn't have Brad with her. Just a crew of 5 men in fluorescent vests already unloading tools and hard hats. One of them jumped down and popped open a toolbox on the tailgate. Another pointed toward the tank site with a wrench in hand. I walked slowly to the edge of my drive. Karen, I said evenly. She didn't look at me right away, just kept scribbling. When she finally did glance up, her face was unreadable. I left you a final notice, Mr. Merrick, she said. I didn't agree to removal. You forfeited your appeal rights by not complying. I complied with the law, not your rule book. She exhaled like I was being unreasonable. The workers were already moving toward the tank. One of them started detaching the riser cap. Another began coiling hoses. I could see the pump housing being opened, wires being clipped with bolt cutters. "Stop," I said, stepping forward. Karen raised a hand without looking. "Let them work. You're making this harder on yourself." I turned to the crew. "This is private property. If you proceed without a court order, I'll hold every one of you personally liable for damage or loss." One of the younger men hesitated, looked at the others. The older foreman shook his head. "We've got the green light from the HOA. That's not the same as the law," I said. "Do you have a police escort, a civil enforcement order?" He didn't answer. They kept going. I watched them for several minutes. Helpless rage coiled tight inside my chest. I could feel Pete's axe calling from the garage wall, but I didn't move. Violence wasn't going to stop them. Karen wanted me to snap to give her grounds for escalation, so I stood there and memorized every face, every movement. They drained the tank first, opened the side valve, and let 2,000 gallons of water spill down the hillside. It cut a muddy trench down toward the road, carving little canyons through the dirt I'd packed by hand. Then they unbolted the tank from its platform. The skid steer backed up and looped thick nylon straps around it, pulling it like a carcass from the earth. The tank tipped, scraped the rock edge, and finally landed with a hollow thunk on the trailer. The pumps were next. Both yanked out wires exposed like severed nerves. The control box was ripped off the post. All the low-profile sprinkler heads, hidden beneath flat stone covers, were smashed one by one. They destroyed everything. Not removed, destroyed. When it was done, the foreman came over, dropped a manila envelope on the corner of my porch railing. "Inventory of removed items," he muttered. I didn't touch it. Karen turned to leave, already adjusting her sunglasses. She paused just for a moment and said over her shoulder, "I hope now we can return to community harmony." I didn't answer. She disappeared down the road like she'd just trimmed a hedge. I stood in the silence she left behind. No birds, no wind. Just the wet scar on the earth where my protection had once stood. I went back inside. I didn't cry, not yet. But I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time. My hands were shaking. Later that evening, as the sun went down and the shadows stretched long across the dry hills, I walked out to the ridge and stood where the tank had been. There were gouges in the soil, tire tracks, broken pipe fittings. Bits of rubber and wire glinted like bones in the dirt. I crouched down, touched the gravel with my fingers still cool from the water runoff. Footsteps crunched behind me. I turned. It was Lyle. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at the mess. "They really did it," he muttered. "Yeah." I watched from the top of my driveway, thought about stepping in. "Why didn't you?" He looked embarrassed. "Didn't want to get fined. I'm on a fixed income. Karen's been after me about my trash bins." I nodded. I didn't blame him. That's how she operated. One form at a time until you either complied or cracked. "She went too far," he said quietly. "Everyone's talking now. Too late." He stepped forward, handed me a folded envelope. "What's this A petition?" "About 20 people have signed. We want the board to step down, or at least put Karen's decisions under review." I took the paper and unfolded it, scrawled names, addresses, lot numbers. Some I recognized, some I didn't. It wasn't a revolution, but it was something. "Thanks, Lyle." He nodded and turned to leave. I stayed on the hill as night fell. Stars started peeking out, the kind that only show in fire-prone skies, clear, wide, and dry. I listened to the wind. It felt sharp. It carried the scent of dry brush. The kind of wind that didn't care about rules or petitions or red blazers. The kind that carried fire. The weather turned like a knife. It started with a wind advisory on the radio. Dry gusts up from the south, 30 to 40 miles per hour, with humidity plummeting below 15%. The kind of numbers that fire crews lose sleep over. I stood on my back porch, arms crossed, watching the eucalyptus sway like they were whispering secrets. The trees knew what was coming, even if the people didn't. I'd lived in California long enough to know the rhythm of a fire season. The stillness, the haze, the wind that moved like it had teeth. But this year it came early, too early. The week after Karen had my system torn out, the temperature spiked 10 degrees. The hills went pale. Grass that had been golden turned gray and brittle. My dog Brisket stopped going near the ridge. He just sat by the porch nose, in the air, ears twitching. I started making mental checklists. Firebag boots, respirators, my late wife's photo albums, my folder of documents. I restocked the extinguisher in the truck and started parking it nose out in the driveway. Old habits. But none of that stopped the HOA newsletter. Karen's smiling face in the top corner, right next to a photo of wildflowers. Spring Beautification Week is here it read. Below that, instructions for painting fences, cleaning gutters, and, I kid you not, removing unapproved hoses or water apparatus visible from the street. She doubled down. That Friday, she held a board event at the Clubhouse HOA Community Social and BBQ. She even put up flyers on the community board next to the mailboxes. I tore one down and read it twice. At the bottom, in fine print, it said, "Reminder all outdoor water systems must comply with HOA guidelines. Violations will be photographed and documented, like a threat dressed as a party." That night, I saw her setting up her patio. From the top of the ridge, my binoculars picked up the outline of a new propane grill. Big, shiny, probably 6-burner. Her husband Tom was arranging folding chairs. A Bluetooth speaker played some kind of jazz. They laughed while they worked. They didn't even look toward the ridge. 2 nights later, the wind picked up hard. The kind of wind that doesn't gust, it pushes. A constant pressure, warm and whispering. I watched it bend the branches and peel back the edges of a garden tarp 2 doors down. I could feel it in my jaw. You don't forget the taste of a fire wind. It's metallic, dry, like chewing tinfoil. At midnight, I couldn't sleep. I walked the property with a flashlight. Checked every hose, every rake, every spigot. I'd hidden a few things Karen hadn't found. A gravity-fed extinguisher barrel, a long-range water cannon buried under a garden box. But it wasn't enough. Not without the main tank. Not without pressure. I kept thinking about the coiled pump lines the sprinkler head smashed flat under boots. That morning, the air was tinted yellow. No clouds, just haze. Brisket barked once at something in the hills. I followed his gaze. Nothing there. But then, around 5:45 p.m., I smelled it. Not smoke, grease. I stepped onto the back porch and turned toward Karen's place. They were grilling. Music played faintly. Laughter echoed. I saw flames flickering under the lid of the propane beast, Karen flipping something with tongs while sipping wine. She had placed the grill 6 feet from the edge of the dry brush fence line. 6 feet from the same dead weeds the HOA fined me for cutting too short last year. 6 feet from the same slope that had once carried sparks all the way to lot 41. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my phone, called the fire marshal's office, left a message. I didn't expect a response. At 6:12 p.m., I saw the first ember drift, tiny, glowing like a firefly made of hate. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run across the road and rip the damn grill out of the ground, but I knew what Karen would say. It's compliant. It's allowed. It's tasteful. I watched. At 6:23, the wind gusted hard. A napkin lifted off one of her patio tables and vanished into the sky. A few of the neighbors clapped like it was funny. At 6:31, the wind shifted, south to southwest, toward the ridge, toward me. The air temperature spiked. I felt it. Like a hairdryer aimed at your face. Brisket whined at the door. And then just after 6:45 p.m., I saw smoke. Not grill smoke. Not the soft gray kind that smells like mesquite. This was black, fast, rising from behind Karen's fence line, where the slope dipped and the dead leaves built up like paper. I ran. Grabbed my boots, my gloves, my respirator, and the emergency pack by the door. I shouted for Brisket to stay inside and bolted across the gravel path cutting between lots, ignoring the startled looks of my neighbors. By the time I reached the back fence of Karen's property, the fire had already jumped. The grass along the slope was lit, long orange tongues licking up the hill toward the cluster of folding chairs. Karen was screaming. Tom was trying to spray the flames with a garden hose. It looked like a water pistol in a war zone. I shouted back away from it. Karen turned her face frozen in horror. She didn't look at me. She didn't call my name. She just screamed one word. Help! And I knew in that second that she finally understood. For a split second, everything stopped. Karen's voice, shrill and cracking, echoed across the slope like a siren that no one had installed. Her red blazer caught the dying sun, making her look almost surreal. A porcelain statue melting in panic. Behind her, the flames snapped louder than her words. The slope burned fast, too fast. I jumped the fence. Tom was still spraying water like it mattered. His face was soaked with sweat, the hose pressure already dropping. It didn't matter. The flames had already reached the pine mulch at the back corner of their patio. I could see the first licks curling around the wooden trellis. "Get her out of here," I barked. He hesitated. "Now." That got through. Tom dropped the hose and grabbed Karen's arm. She resisted at first, like she didn't understand the reality yet. But when the propane tank on the grill let out a loud hiss, she moved. Fast. They stumbled toward the front yard, coughing. I took their place and Anne scanned for any tools, anything usable. The garden hose was useless. The fire had too much momentum. I needed to act fast or this whole block was gone. I pulled the emergency radio from my belt and called it in on the county channel. My old CAL FIRE call sign still worked on local frequency, a leftover from a summer I'd volunteered to assist during a red flag emergency. "This is civilian Russell Merrick at Willow Hills subdivision reporting active brush fire slope ignition near Lot 9. Rapid spread uphill. Wind vector southwest. Request immediate response. Structure threat imminent. Crackles. Then copy that Merrick. Dispatching engine 82 and brush 14, ETA 14 minutes. Evacuate if possible." 14 minutes. I could do a lot in 14 minutes. I sprinted to my truck parked nose out like always. Brisket was inside barking frantically through the window. I opened the door, patted his head. "Good boy. Stay." From the side panel of the truck bed, I pulled the gravity-fed water cannon I'd built years ago as backup. It wasn't powerful, but it didn't need pressure, just height. I had the rigging and tubing still stored in a sealed tote under the camper shell. I hooked everything up as fast as my hands would allow. Behind me, a gust carried hot ash over the fence. The wind screamed louder now. The fire had jumped, crossed over to the shared greenbelt between Karen's lot and the easement. I saw smoke curling under the fence into the next yard. Someone screamed. A dog barked wildly. I slammed the tailgate shut and rolled the truck forward down the side yard. I had to cut between two junipers snapping branches as I drove off-road toward the slope. I deployed the cannon on the incline and let it rip. Water surged from the tank like a giant hissing snake. The arc of spray caught the edge of the flames, turning smoke to steam in thick clouds. I moved slowly, angling the nozzle side to side, knocking down the leading edge just enough to stop it from climbing higher. The tank drained fast. I switched to the handheld sprayer, hit the base of the nearby trees, trying to create a wet line. I heard sirens now, faint but coming closer. Lights flickered far down the access road. Too slow. The wooden fence beside Karen's patio groaned as the fire licked higher. Paint bubbled. Embers spat across the lawn like sparks from a welder's torch. And then the grill exploded. Not a Hollywood fireball. More like a short, sharp boom. A blast of flame and black smoke that knocked down the side trellis and sent shards of metal skittering across the grass. The fire jumped again, upward. I ran back toward the front. Neighbors were pouring out of houses, some filming with their phones, others frozen mouths open. A few ran for garden hoses. One woman dragged her child away, eyes wide with fear. I passed Lyle near his mailbox. He yelled, "You need help." I shook my head. "Evacuate them. Get people out." He nodded and ran. At Karen's driveway, I saw her slumped on the curb, shaking. Her face was covered in soot. Tom knelt beside her, arms around her shoulders, trying to calm her. But she wasn't crying. Not yet. Just stunned. That was the moment it really hit her. The realization that fire didn't care about rules. That the HOA couldn't find it. That visual harmony didn't matter when your home was about to burn to the ground. That night, the fire engines came in loud and bright. Engine 82 rolled up and immediately deployed. Brush 14 went around the back, hitting the ridge with a jet of foam. I waved them down, briefed them quickly. Their captain looked at my rig and gave a sharp nod. "You slowed it. Might have saved this whole side." I didn't say anything, just stood there covered in ash, hands trembling. By the time the fire was knocked down, It had scorched Karen's entire backyard. The trellis was gone. The patio furniture was a melted mess. Part of her garage wall was blackened. But the house, the structure, was intact, thanks to a homemade cannon and 20 gallons of emergency water she didn't even know existed. As they packed up the fire, Captain approached me again. "You Merrick?" "Yeah." He held out a hand. "Heard your call. Smart move. Saved us minutes, maybe lives." I shook his hand. He looked past me toward the crowd gathering near the burned yard. "You used to do wildfire mitigation 30 years. He smiled. "Still got it." Then he walked off. I turned to see Karen standing barely, her legs shaking under her weight. She looked at me, really looked, like she'd never seen me before. And she whispered, Why would you help me?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about Pete, about Sarah, about everything that fire had taken from me. And I said simply, "Because someone should have helped me when it was my turn." Her eyes filled. But I didn't wait for tears. I walked away. The next morning, the neighborhood was quiet in that strange, uncomfortable way things get after a disaster. Like the air didn't quite know what to do with itself. The sky hung heavy low with ash, a gray mist clinging to everything it touched. A few birds chirped, confused probably. But otherwise, there was just the soft crunch of feet walking the sidewalks and the distant beep of trucks reversing. I stood by the ridge staring at the scorched path the fire had taken. The once golden slope was now a black smear etched like a scar across the neighborhood's back. Bits of Karen's patio trellis lay twisted in the dirt. Her backyard furniture looked like it had been dropped into a furnace. The smell of burned plastic and cedar mulch still hung thick in the air. They said it had only burned for 26 minutes, but in fire time, that's forever. The fire crews had packed up just before dawn. They left behind pink fire retardant streaks, boot prints in the char, and one question everyone seemed too polite to ask. How did it spread that fast, I knew. And so did the fire investigator. She arrived around 10 a.m., stepping out of a county-marked SUV wearing a windbreaker and a steel gray ponytail. She introduced herself as Dana Soto, shook my hand, and got straight to it. "I got your call," she said. "Heard you used to do mitigation." "Yeah, long time ago." She nodded, glancing at the ridge. This slope shouldn't have ignited that fast. Not unless it was preloaded. Dry grass, accelerated, wind fuel, buildup. And without suppression, she didn't have to finish. I walked her along the burn line, showed her the faint trench where my tank had once been the footprint of the old pump house. I showed her where the sprinkler heads used to be, now just cracked rock covers and broken tubing half buried in the soot. She took photos, a lot of them. After a while, she lowered her camera. "You had a system, yes ma'am, county approved. HOA tore it out 2 weeks ago." Her eyebrows lifted. I handed her the binder, the one I'd been building for months. Every letter, every permit, every certified receipt. She flipped through the pages, growing more and more silent. At the end, she closed it, looked up at me, and said, "This isn't going away." And just like that, she walked back toward Karen's property. By noon, neighbors started drifting in. First Lyle, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one without speaking, just nodded toward the ridge. Then Rebecca, the retired teacher from Lot 11. She said, "I'm so sorry, Russell. I didn't realize how serious it was. I thought you were just being stubborn." I said with a half smile. But I was also right. She laughed, but it was soft, nervous. "Karen's in her house," she whispered. "Blinds all closed. I think the board's meeting later. People are not happy." I didn't reply, just kept sipping the coffee. It tasted like burnt pine needles and regret. More neighbors showed up throughout the afternoon. Some brought casseroles as if this was a funeral. Others just lingered, trying to look casual, murmuring their thanks. Not one of them mentioned the HOA rulebook. It was strange how fast things flipped when the fire came. By 4 p.m., someone had put a folding sign by the community entrance, "Emergency HOA board meeting, 6 p.m. clubhouse." Someone else, maybe Lyle, had scribbled beneath it in black Sharpie, "Open to all homeowners." It wasn't subtle. At 5:45, I showed up, not to speak, just to watch. The clubhouse was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Nearly 60 people crammed into the room. Some stood along the back wall, others leaned against folding chairs. The air was heavy with smoke residue and quiet fury. Karen sat at the head table, pale and stiff. No red blazer tonight. Just a gray sweater and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept. Brad was beside her, lips pursed, scrolling through his phone like he couldn't feel the room turning. The meeting opened without pleasantries. Karen cleared her throat. We want to address what happened last night. The fire. Murmurs rippled. We're thankful no lives were lost, she continued, and we recognize the response from fire services was excellent. Lyle stood. No lives were lost, he repeated flatly, because one man did what this board refused to allow prepare. A few claps. Someone muttered, damn right. Karen tried to recover. Russell Merrick acted independently. He saved half the neighborhood, Rebecca called from the side. He wouldn't have needed to, someone else added, if you hadn't ripped out his system. Karen flinched. Brad finally spoke. The board followed protocol. The system violated visual standards. A man near the front barked a bitter laugh. Visual standards. My kid almost choked on smoke last night. You gonna fine us for the soot on our fences too? It broke after that. The room cracked open like dry bark. Neighbors standing, shouting, accusing. Years of bottled frustration poured out the fines, the letters, the condescension. A woman held up a photo of her burned fence. A teenager spoke about losing his dog in the confusion. A man from Lot 4 yelled, my hose was tangled because of your code-approved landscaping. Do you know what that feels like when fire's coming? Karen looked ready to cry, but nobody moved to comfort her. Not this time. I stayed seated. Let it happen. At one point, Brad said something about reforming policy. Someone shouted back, resign. And then another voice joined in. All of you. A chant started, low, angry, focused, step down, step down, step down. Karen finally stood. She looked directly at me across the room. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something. An apology, maybe. But nothing came. She picked up her binder and walked out. No one stopped her. Outside, the sky began to dim again. Ash still clung to the edges of the clubhouse roof. The air smelled like truth, acrid and necessary. I sat on the curb watching the sun dip low behind the burned ridge. Brisket curled at my feet. Lyle came over. So, you gonna run for the board? I snorted. Hell no. He laughed. Someone's gotta clean up this mess. I looked out over the street at the people finally talking to each other. Really talking. For once, they weren't hiding behind policy sheets and snide emails. Maybe fire burns more than wood. Maybe it burns pride. And maybe that's how you clear space for something new. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fire was out, but the glow lingered. Not on the ridge, but in my mind. I kept seeing it, flames licking the sky like angry fingers, the propane tank flaring, Karen's screams slicing through the smoke. I walked the ridge again, flashlight in hand, boots crunching over the blackened ground. The soil was still warm in places. Patches of ash floated with every step. I could smell the chemicals from the retardant, a bitter tang that clung to everything. A single garden chair sat warped near the edge of the hill. One of Karen's. It had somehow survived the worst of it, though its legs were scorched and the plastic seat was warped inward, like it had tried to curl into itself. I picked it up, turned it over. The underside was blackened with soot, but readable, property of Willow Hills, HOA Lot 9. I set it upright and left it there, a lone sentinel overlooking the scarred neighborhood. By morning, the news trucks had arrived. They parked outside the entrance just past the broken community sign. The one that used to say, Willow Hills, a beautiful place to belong. Now, it just said, Willow H, half the letters melted, the rest stained pink with fire retardant. A reporter cornered me near my mailbox. Sir, are you the homeowner who acted during the fire? I didn't respond. Can we get a quote for Channel 4? We've heard your homemade system may have prevented the blaze from spreading to several houses. I kept walking. It wasn't about quotes. Not for me. It was about what shouldn't have happened, what didn't have to happen. At noon, the fire marshal returned. Dana Soto. She brought paperwork this time. Clipboards, maps, a camera crew from the county. This is now a formal investigation, she said, speaking to the small group of residents who'd gathered outside the clubhouse. We are treating this fire as preventable, and we are reviewing the decisions made by both the HOA and the affected property owners leading up to the incident. Karen wasn't there, but her absence was louder than any protest. Dana handed me a report. It listed the ignition point beneath the edge of Karen's patio grill. Probable cause grease flare accelerated by wind. Contributing factor proximity to dead vegetation and slope line. And then it said it. Bold typed, in all caps, suppression system removed 2 weeks prior by HOA order. Contributed to delayed control of fire front. I read it 3 times. It wasn't just vindication. It was proof. Dana looked at me. You kept records. That made this easier. Thank you. I nodded. It wasn't for revenge, I know. But it might prevent the next one. She left me with a copy. The county camera crew asked to take a photo of the site. I agreed. Only on the condition that they include the binder. The one with every letter, every violation, every receipt Karen ever sent. They did. The photo showed it sitting alone on the scorched ridge next to the melted PVC piping and the burned remnants of a sign that once read, Violation Notice, Lot 17. Fitting. Later that afternoon, I saw her. Karen. She came walking down the sidewalk alone wearing jeans and a sweatshirt. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no entourage. Just a woman with shoulders drawn in like the wind might snap her. She stopped at the edge of her driveway, staring at the blackened backyard. The house still stood, but the windows were boarded up, and the smell of smoke clung to the siding. The lawn was patchy with burned spots. Her grill was gone. Nothing left but a melted gas line and a few twisted bolts. I was on my porch sipping coffee. She saw me, paused, then walked slowly across the road. I didn't move. When she reached the steps, she didn't come up, just stood there looking at the gravel. I came to apologize, she said quietly. I waited. For everything. The fines, the letters, the removal. She glanced up. You tried to warn me. I said nothing. I was wrong. Still, I said nothing. She took a deep breath. The fire marshal said your system might have saved my house. Maybe the neighbors too. Might have, I echoed. Hard to know now. Karen's voice cracked. They asked me to resign. I looked at her. And I did. That hung in the air. No cheering, no celebration. Just a long, slow exhale. I wanted to tell you in person, she said. Not in an email, not at a meeting. Here, because this is where it started. I nodded slowly. She turned to leave, then paused. I heard you lost someone in a fire. Years ago. I looked away. 2, actually. She swallowed. I'm sorry. I didn't say thank you. I wasn't ready for that. But I didn't stop her either. She crossed the street, walked up her driveway, and disappeared behind her half-scorched front door. Brisket, padded up beside me, leaned against my leg. People change, I said to him softly. He licked my boot once, then sat. We stayed like that a while, watching the sunlight flicker through the haze. That evening, as dusk settled and the air cooled slightly, the neighborhood gathered again. This time, there was no agenda. No clipboards, no podium. Just lawn chairs, paper plates, a couple of coolers. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else brought a portable radio and played soft blues. And people, actual people, started talking. Not about violations, about gardens, about dogs, about the weather, about fear. Lyle raised a cup to me. To Russell, he said. Who did what had to be done? I didn't raise mine back, just smiled. Because it was never about heroism. It was about prevention, about what happens when someone listens before the smoke comes. And finally, they were listening. You'd think once the fire was out, things would go back to normal. But fires don't just burn wood. They burn trust, burn silence. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they burn through the lies people tell themselves. About control, about safety, about who's right and who's just the loudest in the room. In the days after the fire, Willow Hills felt like a town waking up with smoke still in its lungs. The scorched ridge loomed like a black signature scrawled across our quiet little postcard neighborhood, a permanent reminder that beauty doesn't mean much when it isn't backed by wisdom. Karen didn't show her face for 4 days. Her mailbox overflowed. HOA documents, letters from vendors, maybe even a few sympathy cards, though I wasn't sure who'd sent those. Her lawn browned. The once perfect flower bed out front wilted, as if even the tulips didn't want to keep pretending. Then one morning, the for sale sign went up. No announcement, no goodbyes. Just a white post hammered into the dirt like a white flag. I watched from my porch as a real estate agent with too much perfume and not enough tact placed flyers in the info box, stepping carefully around the charred patches in the grass. Karen didn't come out. She never said another word to me. I didn't need her to. Sometimes silence is the apology. The board didn't last much longer. Brad tried to rally, sent out a mass email titled Rebuilding Together with a lot of vague language about lessons learned and moving forward. But no one showed up to his emergency meeting. Instead, 27 homeowners signed a petition to dissolve the current board and hold a community-wide election. The vote passed in less than a week. They asked me to run. I said no. But I did nominate Lyle. He resisted at first, said he was too old, too grumpy. But the neighborhood needed someone with spine and sense, and I told him exactly that in front of 12 people on folding chairs. He laughed and said, "Hell, if you think I can do it, I better try." He won by a landslide. With the old HOA dissolved, the community started making changes, real ones. The first thing they did was rescind the fine system. No more threats in the mailbox, no more citations over gravel width or mailbox flag colors. Next, they voted to create a safety committee, not just for fire, but for flooding, power outages, medical emergencies. I offered to consult nothing official. I didn't want a title, just the freedom to share what I knew. People actually listen now. I helped install 2 new water tanks, one on the ridge, where mine had been, and a second on the east side where brush grew thick behind a cluster of homes. This time, the neighborhood paid for it. Funny how fast the purse strings loosen after they nearly melt. Rebecca helped organize volunteer drills. Lyle hosted workshops on how to use extinguishers and prep go bags. We even had a visit from CAL FIRE who walked through the neighborhood and praised the new mitigation plan. The same inspector who reviewed my torn-down system stood by the new tank and said, "You all might have just set the standard for the next HOA model." And for once, that phrase didn't make me roll my eyes. Karen's house sold in early fall. No one saw her leave. The moving truck came at dawn, packed fast gone by lunchtime. Her red Blazer never made another appearance. No farewell email, no press release, just a quiet exit, the kind fire leaves when the embers die and there's nothing left to burn. The new owners were a young couple. Teachers, I think. They planted native shrubs, added fire-resistant ground cover, and installed a rain catchment system. I walked over one morning, introduced myself, told them, "You picked a good neighborhood." They smiled and said, "We heard, especially about the guy with the hose cannon." Brisket barked once from the gate like he approved. It took me a long time to clean the ridge. Not because it was hard work, though it was, but because I wanted to take my time. I pulled every bit of melted tubing, every scorched fitting, every twisted nail that had once held up the pump house. I stacked them neatly in a pile at the edge of the hill. Then I burned them. A small, controlled burn. My permit sat in my pocket. The hose lay coiled nearby. Lyle stood by with a shovel just in case. We said nothing, just watched the fire eat what was left of my old system. A funeral for plastic and steel and stubbornness. When it was done, I raked the ashes smooth and started building again. This time, with help. 3 neighbors showed up the next day, tools in hand. No one asked them to come, they just did. 2 more came the next afternoon hauling gravel in wheelbarrows. Someone donated a fresh tank. Newer, larger, already painted the color of dirt. The system went up in a week. Better. Stronger. This time, no one complained about the view. One evening, as the sun slipped low and the sky turned that gentle amber you only get after fire season breaks, I sat on the edge of the ridge and watched the lights come on one by one across the neighborhood. Kids rode bikes down the main road. Someone grilled, but this time, it was safe. Propane shutoff installed brush-cleared tank far from the slope. I took a sip of coffee. Brisket laid beside me, head on my boot tail, thumping softly. Behind me, a new sign had gone up at the entrance of the community Willow Hills Rebuilt Resilient Together. Someone asked me what I thought of it. I said it's a good start. But resilient, that word has to be earned. And we were just beginning. The day we finished the new system, it rained. Not a storm, not yet. Just a light, steady drizzle. The kind that seeps slowly into the earth after months of drought, like the land is learning how to drink again. It was the first rain we'd had since the fire, and it came with a kind of quiet reverence that no one wanted to interrupt. I stood by the new tank at the top of the ridge, watching beads of water roll down the side of the fresh-painted steel. It blended into the hillside perfectly. Same earth tone shade, same slope-aware design. But this one had something more. A plaque. Small, simple. In honor of those who warned us. Donated by the community of Willow Hills, September 2025. I hadn't asked for it. Lyle had the idea. He paid for it out of his own pocket. It's not about you, he'd said. It's about us. Finally, listening. I didn't argue. Sometimes respect looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like 100 feet of hose, coiled neatly beneath gravel pressure-tested valvatagged, ready for the next spark we all hoped would never come. The neighborhood looked different now, not in the obvious ways. Though some homes had new paint, new trees, a few fences, rebuilt taller or stronger. But in how people acted. They waved more, walked slower, talked longer on the sidewalks. Even the way they argued changed. Disagreements still happened. This was suburbia, after all. But now they happened face-to-face, at cookouts, over coffee, not through passive-aggressive letters or digital fines. The new board kept things lean: 1 monthly meeting, 2 standing committees, safety and community events, and no unnecessary rules. The first policy they passed was this: no rule shall override safety. No aesthetic shall override reason. No homeowner shall be silenced for speaking with concern. It was handwritten at first, then printed, then framed and hung inside the clubhouse, right where Karen's portrait used to be. No one asked where it went. One afternoon in October, I heard the rumble of tires on gravel and looked up to see a familiar face. The fire marshal. Dana Soto stepped out of her vehicle, hands in her jacket pockets, same quiet presence as always. "Mind if I take another look?" she asked. "Be my guest," I said. We walked the perimeter together. She asked smart questions, noted how the windbreak trees had been trimmed back, admired the water dispersion trenches, examined the dual shut-off valves. "You did it right," she said. "We did it together." She looked out over the ridge toward the rows of homes below. Roofs all intact, windows, clean driveways, peaceful. "It's rare," she said after a while, "to see a place learn the hard way and still come out better." I thought about that. Then I said, "Pain teaches faster than paperwork." She smiled. "Mind if I use that in a briefing? Go ahead." She paused before heading back to her vehicle. "I read your report. Your actions that night. They're going to be used in state training materials." That made me blink. "I didn't do it for that. I know," she said. "But that's why it matters." And then she was gone. A few weeks later, I stood at the edge of the ridge during a town fire drill. The new homeowners, the ones who bought Karen's old place, were helping lead the drill. Their 2 kids were running around in little yellow fire hats, squealing with delight as they got sprayed gently with a training hose. I watched from the hilltop, sipping coffee. Brisket lay beside me, older now, a little slower, but still loyal as ever. The sky above was clear. But I didn't trust blue skies the way I used to. Now I respected them. I prepared for when they'd darken. That's the thing about living close to danger. You learn that safety isn't just the absence of threat. It's the presence of people who care enough to act before the smoke rises. And sometimes it takes losing something. A home, a system, a sense of trust, to understand what you've been ignoring all along. In the early spring, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no HOA header. Just one sheet of paper. "Dear Mr. Merrick, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm well. I've moved to a smaller place near my sister in Oregon. No boards, no meetings, just trees and time to think. What happened in Willow Hills changed me. Thank you for what you did. Not just for saving my house, but for not letting me pretend I didn't need saving. I hope the community is better now. It deserves to be. Sincerely, Karen." I folded the letter once, didn't frame it, didn't burn it either. Just placed it inside the back of the binder, the same binder that had once held every violation, every warning, every fight. Now, it held closure. One last thing. I rebuilt the pump shed just like before, but this time, I added a bench under the eave facing west. Some evenings, I sit there watching the sun slide behind the hill, casting long shadows over a neighborhood that learned how to grow from the burn. Not around it, through it, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes. I see people walking by stop and place a hand on the plaque beside the tank, not out of ritual, out of respect.